Thanks, Mr. Chair. Really, this is a line call for Labor, the support for this bill. It's been very interesting listening to the speeches from New Zealand First and the Greens on this, because we've all got something in common. It's not all the same thing, but we do have some of the issues in common. And I think when making this line call, and I think in our Labor's minority report on this bill, we called it qualified support, and I, in the second reading of the speech, called it grudging support. Grudging. It's because of the time period that it's taken to get to this point where the film industry is still not at the point where they've converted to the digital technology, and where they've come before the Select Committee yet again asking for another extension. I certainly think that in the Select Committee we had one of the best discussions on copyright that I have experienced in my almost 5 years in Parliament. And I was impressed by the evolution of understanding by my National Party colleagues, where I think they finally actually get some of the issues involved. And I do want to give credit to the Chair and to his other colleague, Sam Lotte, for the interesting discussion that we did have on the business issues and the competition issues in the Select Committee. I acknowledge the point that New Zealand First is making around the need for the time period to convert to the technology. I have to say I differ on the issue of the use of downloading techniques by members of the public in order to get access to material that they can't get otherwise. And that is where I guess where the Greens and Labor converge to some extent on the absolute importance of this Parliament being aware of why those issues are so important, and why being a small country in New Zealand at the top of the world or the end of the world, depending on which way you're looking, it is so critical that our economy and the habits of consumers so much rely on the internet, and where the internet has to be considered, and it has to be up front in consideration of any legislation in this House. And I don't think quite that this legislation has quite got there, but it is going some way there. We had 10 submissions on this bill. They were evenly balanced in terms of for and against. There was a submission by the New Zealand Motion Picture Exhibitors Association. I do want to talk about that, because one of the points that they made is the critical reason as to why Labor supports this bill. And we support it because essentially it's about protecting the viability of cinemas outside the 5 main metropolitan cities from the effects of unrestricted parallel importing. Now, my colleague Jacinda Ardern and the New Zealand First, Tracy, she made this point as well, about the absolute importance of our regional cinemas. I want to actually take us to what that importance is and why it's important, and where some of these cinemas are, because that is why we think this bill is important. We think that the other reasons for supporting this bill that was put up and have been supported by the government on the other side aren't as important. And it's time that the big cinema chains got their act together and worked out their business models to deal with the way that people are and their consumer habits have changed. But regional New Zealand is important, and Labor actually gets that. And the services that are provided in regional New Zealand, cinema being one of them, is actually really critical for communities to be able to have. Mr. Chair.
Oh, Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. It's really important that regional New Zealand does have access to the same kind of services that their urban cousins do, and these are one of the critical ones. Now, I think my colleague Jacinda Ardern mentioned that there are 120 film venues around New Zealand. Well, 80 of those film venues, in the sense of being chains and activities, 80 of those movie venues in regional New Zealand and are what is described as independent and art house cinemas. Now, they are defined as being where they get to be seen in small, independently owned cinemas, art galleries, film societies, in schools or university classrooms. They tend to be locally owned or and operated by New Zealanders or community trusts, and are often they can be dependent on the larger players for access to film titles and distribution. And a little bit of history here, because it's important, because in the early decades of film going in New Zealand, the independent cinemas dominated until the ascendancy of the duopolies of what was called then Kerridge Odeon and the amalgamated chains. Does anyone remember them? Yeah. Who largely controlled film distribution and exhibition in New Zealand. But that has changed now, and we have the large chains, which are the event cinemas, which are such as Hoyt's and Readings, etc. There are others, but there's a good number of these cinemas are small, and they are a really integral part of New Zealand. And I want to actually tell you what a few of them are, because I think it's actually, I did go through the list. There's an interesting list. They include the Capitol Cinema in Te Puke, the Castle Duo Cinema in Kaikoui, the Cafe Cinema and Cafe in Kerikeri, Cinema Paradiso in Methven, South Canterbury, Cinema Paradiso in Wanaka, the Circus Cinema, Restaurant and Bar in Martinborough, the Deluxe Theatre in Opotiki, the Fiordlands Cinema, the Focal Point Cinema in Levin, the Lido in, Lido in Hamilton, the Lighthouse, and there's several lighthouses. There's one in Cuba, Lighthouse Cuba, and there's one in Petone. The Metro Town Hall Cinema in Dunedin, also the Rialto in Dunedin, the Penthouse in Brooklyn, the Starlight Cinema in Taupo, and the Monkey House in Whitianga. There are many, and I could go on about them, but these are cinemas that rely on that provide an integral service in their communities. They are in the process of converting to digital technology, but they have struggled, and this is the reason why Labor supports this bill, because of that struggle and of the time that it's taken, which is longer than we would like, but where those communities need the time to translate. And I'd like to say this bill does not address a wider issue, and I'd like the Minister to hear this because it is actually important. This bill is just the continuation of an extension, but what it doesn't do is provide a mechanism for some of these cinemas who may not be able to make that transition under this time period. We have said very firmly we will not, as if we are in government, and certainly on this side of the House, if we're not, we will not support a further extension. But there is a wider issue, and that issue is those cinemas are important. It's a wider community issue. It goes beyond the scope of this bill, and I think that the government and this issue was raised during the Select Committee, that there is an issue that should be addressed about community support for integral services such as these community cinemas that may not be able to, under their current circumstances, be able to make that financial transition to the digital technology. If for no other reason, we certainly do not support this bill going further, but those cinemas needs to be addressed by the government.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm sure my colleagues will make excellent contributions in a few minutes' time when they get that opportunity. Mr. Chair, I want to pick up where my colleague Claire Curran has just left off.